Hey, good morning. It's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and today I'm taking on moving one of the roses in my garden. This big guy back here is Madame Hardy, which needs to move from one place in my garden to another. And I guess the first question I'll ask is, how is that any different than planting a new rose? You still have to pick a good site, you still have to pick a good soil and prepare that soil. The difference is that with an existing rose, you're going to have something called transplant shock. And transplant shock is the physiological reaction of the rose to the damage you do, as careful as you are, as you move that rose from one place to another, and the sudden change of environment. So clearly your strategy then has to be to try to reduce the amount of damage and to ease it into and give it time to adjust to the change in its environment. So you're not going to start, your first tool shouldn't be your pruners, your first tool shouldn't be your shovel, your first tool should probably be a calendar. So on a calendar, highlight those that are the hottest months. In my northern temperate climate, that includes everything from June, July, and August as the very hottest times and times when I wouldn't want to transplant a rose. I can also highlight on there the winter months of November, December, and January, where I'm most liable to have the cold times when digging could be difficult just due to freezing, but also there's little advantage in transplanting a rose at that time because root development will be very, very minimal during those months. So that leaves me those shoulder seasons, the cool fall and the cool spring. In the fall, we're talking, September, October, and in the spring, probably February, March, April, and into May. In my northern temperate climate, that's probably the schedule when it's going to be the best. In the southern hemisphere, where it's reversed, of course, in terms of the seasons, you may want to avoid those hottest summer seasons like, say, December, January, and February, and aim your transplanting into the mild or cooler season. If you don't have a very cold winter, you might be able to do it all the way through, say, May, June, July, August. Might be your safest time to make a transplant. As I make this video, it is March, so that makes it a pretty safe time for me to tackle moving a rose. So the next thing I'm going to pull out is that shovel I talked about, and I'm going to take my time. I'll put this on the video as well. I'll get you some close-up shots of digging, although I'm sure you've seen me dig before. But the point is to take your time, dig a wide circle around the rose, giving yourself a little bit of time to move in and try to get out as many of those roots as you can, being realistic that you are definitely not going to get all of the roots, and even as you pull it out, you're going to break off fine root hairs. There will be damage to your rose. Your goal here now is just to try to minimize that amount of damage to the roots of your rose before you make that move. All right, I'm in my rose garden now, and I've brought the rose with me. So this is going to be its permanent location. But before I dig a hole for it, I want to show you a couple of things about the root system. First of all, I'll give you a close-up here. You can see I brought a fair amount of roots with me, but I definitely left a bunch behind. So this rose is going to have some recovery to do. The other thing I will say is I didn't on purpose strip the soil from these roots. That's just the way it happens with my heavy clay soil. It just tends to come off in clods. If you can bring it with the ball of soil, that's just fine too, and it may reduce some of the damage on some of those fine feeder roots. For some of you who are familiar with the common instructions on transplanting shrubs, you may be asking, why didn't I pull out my loppers first? Why didn't I give this thing a haircut on the top to match what I'm going to be doing to the roots? That way I get a more balanced shrub, the root to shoot ratio isn't so far out of whack. And the answer to that is that horticultural research is very, very mixed on this result about whether pruning the top growth or not pruning the top growth improves the outcome for your shrubs or trees in the landscape after transplanting. I'm going to include in the description here a fact sheet by Linda Chalker-Scott where they talk about the exact issue about whether pruning the top while you transplant is a good idea. And I'm going to give you a couple of counterpoints from the article. One is that when you do injury to the roots and then you subsequently injure the top to match, what you're really doing is compounding the injury. You're taking away your plant's stored energy reserves, you're taking away the capacity of it to grow new leaves and new shoots and to use that energy that it takes from leaves to help to regrow the root system. So it has to focus on healing both things, and really adding extra injury, extra points for disease to come into your plant is not always a good idea. On this plant, I have a particular reason for not wanting to prune it at the same time as transplant is this is an old garden rose. It blooms once in the season, it blooms on old wood. So if I give it a hard haircut now, I definitely will be sacrificing the blooms for this year. Now, if it is the case that you decide to go ahead and prune at the same time as you transplant, I think that's fine. A lot of people have been doing it and they've come out okay with it. I would just say at that point then focus on the good practices of rose pruning, that is trying to focus on the weak crossing, disease damaged branches, and opening up the structure of the rose so there's more airflow and more air circulation. It's important that you get your rose back into the ground very quickly after pulling it out so that it doesn't dry out or stress due to being out of the ground. If you do have to take it out of the ground for any length of time, like let's say you're moving, I would put it into a pot, cover it over with moist potting soil, and maybe even store it in a shady location to reduce stress. Once it does come time to put it into the ground, dig a hole that's big enough to fit the entire root system. Assuming you have a reasonable garden soil, I would not amend at this point. I would just backfill with the regular garden soil, tamping it down to the same firmness as the surrounding soil. The reasons I don't add a bunch of stuff in right now is you have a compromised root system, a damaged root system. The last thing it needs right now is the extra salt and organic matter around it that would come from things like manure, compost, fertilizer, fish heads, banana peels, whatever else people might be saying to put into that hole. I would probably make the exception that if you wanted to put in something that's very slow releasing, like bone meal, or put in some of the mycorrhiza that is recommended for planting with plants, that's fine. But myself, I don't put anything at all. If you do want to add something, the most important thing, the necessary thing, is a consistent moisture after planting. Because it has that damaged root system, you need to have regular waterings. At this time of year when it's cool in the spring, you might be going out to it twice a week. If it were in the summer, if you were forced to make your transplant during the summer, it would be much more frequently, perhaps even every day. And I probably would add a wood mulch or a mulch to the surface of the soil to maintain that moisture consistently around the newly transplanted rose. All right, that's all I've got for you on transplanting roses. I hope it's been useful as a discussion, and if anybody has other recommendations, if you transplanted roses, had success or had failures, please drop them below in the comments. Share that with the community. Thanks.